Hello, everybody. So, this is going to be a video on Ukraine and what should happen. Um, there's been a lot of talk about, on YouTube especially, by like preppers and everything, talking about how nuclear war is like basically imminent. There's a lot of people freaking out, thinking that World War III is going to happen. And you know, Russia's nuclear forces are on alert. Sweden is going the craziest it's gone since like World War II or something with its alert levels and everything. Um, Germany is doubling its military budget. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And so I used to be completely obsessed with international relations. But in the past like year or so, I haven't necessarily been keeping up. But the main thing to know about the current Ukrainian conflict, like right now, if you just like forget about Crimea and the Donbass and like everything in the east of Ukraine, I think that it's called the Donbass region or something like that. Um, and focus on the current invasion, like it's a pretty simple, just straight up land grab annexation attempt by Russia. Like it's pretty crazy. Um it's basically, just invading a country with no pretext and basically just saying that that country's statehood is invalid. Uh just kind of just as Putin just kind of just said that and then invaded. It's like it's crazy. So I feel like a lot of older people who were alive during the Cold War, to them, Ukraine is the Ukraine. It's a part of Russia or a region of the Soviet Union. And what's interesting is that Ukraine, on a lot of maps, the USSR map showed Romania and Poland as being their own Soviet republics, but Ukraine would be integrated. So they would draw the border for a Soviet republic like Romania, but not for Ukraine. So I find that interesting. I don't know why, but it's interesting. So, anyways, a lot of older people don't really see Ukraine as a country as much as they would see something like Finland as a country, for example, because Ukraine wasn't a country until like 30 years ago. So, yeah, Ukraine's been a country for a little over 30 years. Um, and yeah, it's just crazy to be living in sort of like a post crazy Putin world. I feel like, because I feel like there's no going back from the crazy now. Like Putin's gone cuckoo, I think. If but so I wanted to move on to like what I think the United States should do. And it's oscillated a lot because I think that, for example, having Ukraine join NATO, here's the main debate, guys, is whether or not, at least from what I've seen on New York Times opinion on everything, because I've read like 4 or 5 New York Times opinion art pieces, and they're pretty diverse on like what the United States should do in Ukraine. And so the main debates are whether or not the United States sort of overstepped its bounds in trying to get Ukraine to join NATO, And according to Russia, the CIA orchestrated the the coup in Ukraine in 2013 or whatever, the one that ousted Paul Manafort's friend, the Russian puppet. In like 2013, there was a coup in Ukraine that overthrew the Russian puppet, Paul Manafort's friend, and he ran back to Russia, the puppet. And then Ukraine had a pro-Western government since then. And since then, Russia's been going crazy. And, of course, according to Putin, it's like a fascist CIA coup. But it doesn't really look like that to me. But whether it is or isn't, the point is that the United States did flirt with the idea of getting Ukraine into NATO. And the question is, well, did that kind of instigate Russia to do a sort of preemptive strike because they don't want to be bordered by NATO? I think that surrounding Russia with NATO is pretty brutal, but at the same time, I don't see why Russia should care if they're not going to do this kind of stuff. Like, I get that. Okay, I get why they should care, but not care to the extent of doing something like this. This is, I think, clearly a matter of pride. It's a personal thing with Putin. A lot kind of like how the United States invasion with Iraq was like personal in a lot of ways, had to do with personal things regarding the leaders. I think that that's what's happening in Russia as well. It's one of the reasons, things are very personal for Putin in regards to Ukraine. It's why he hates Hillary so much. So, there's a lot going on, but I personally feel like, are we, NATO's a defensive pact. So you have to think of it, if Mexico had a defensive pact with Russia where it said, if Mexico is attacked, Russia will defend them. You have to ask, like, would the United States invade Mexico over that? Is it worth that? Like, it's like, if you weren't going to attack them, it's not that huge a deal. It is, though, because Mexico can then put, missile defense, anti-air, and nukes, missiles, all kinds of stuff, and get military stuff like to threaten the United States mainland more. But besides that, I think that putting offensive stuff like cruise missiles and things like in Ukraine pointing right at Moscow, like, yeah, that's a little bit belligerent. But giving Ukraine anti-air that can shoot down Russian jets, like, man, I think that we could have done it. But there is an aspect that because Ukraine is so close to Russia, it's not the same as like France. So France has nukes, right? But if we gave Ukraine nukes, that would start World War III. So it's like, they're not even that far from each other. As an American, it's frustrating because it's like, guys, it's all right next to each other. Getting from Germany to Ukraine, for me, that's like going like right next to the next state over. Not even, because I'm in California. That's like going to San Francisco. So it's like, guys, like, it's all right next to each other. So the difference between France, Germany, and Ukraine people treat it like it's this giant divide, but it's really not. They're right effing next to each other. So, you know, I think that the United States and NATO should have done what it's doing right now 20 years ago. You have to remember that Obama, this is something that isn't talked about. And I'm not going to say anything like, positive or negative about it, other than the fact, like, Obama had a Russian reset period where he attempted to sort of reset relations with Russia and kind of like bury the hatchet. And it didn't end up working out very well. Like, you give Putin an inch, he takes a mile, basically. And in my opinion, like, President Trump also was sort of attempting a Russian reset in the sense of like not being hostile to Russia. So he kind of had like a, hey, why don't we get along attitude, the same as Obama. So in that sense, they both tried to be like, hey, Putin, I know that you had all these problems with my predecessor, but like, whatever, why don't we make a bunch of money together and trade and stuff? And, Putin just hates the West, man. I don't know what's up with him. Because, Russia could have opened up more. Russia, it's my dream where Russia is just another Germany and another France and another Italy or even another Denmark, like if they had been free this whole time after the Soviet Union collapsed, they could have stayed free, but they let Putin just take over. He sent tanks to their freaking parliament. So, Okay, so I do think that it's fair for the United States to have been putting missile defenses in Ukraine this whole time, supplying them with that, just like we do Poland. And I would even go so far as to say that putting them in NATO, I mean, it's pretty belligerent. But I still don't think that would be pretext for invasion. Just like how I don't think the United States would have the right to invade Mexico for joining a Russian NATO, except the United States would, by the way. So, you have to remember that. I don't care about, it's like hypocrisy when it's a sovereign nation. It's like a sovereign nation can do whatever the hell it wants. That's why it's kind of like Russia. That's why I said it's like if Russia doesn't want to recognize the statehood of Ukraine anymore, then that's it. Ukraine's not a country from Russia's worldview. And it just comes down to who has bigger guns after that and who's willing to fight harder. That's it. Just like Taiwan. Well, not just like Well, yeah, kind of like Taiwan. But Taiwan, unfortunately, never got the statehood that Ukraine did. See, it's different because unlike Taiwan, Ukraine is in the UN and Russia signed treaties with it to respect its sovereignty. And then also, there was also treaties to not have it join NATO, but so the question is, okay, so did the West overstep its bounds and this is a retaliation? And for me, it's like, what is Russia's problem in the first place? I know what their problem is. It's like a long laundry list, but in reality, they don't have to be as big of bullies as they are. They just don't. They have enough problems. Their country has so many problems. They don't need to be spending this huge effort doing this. They have all sorts of issues. As far as the sanctions, they haven't cut off Russian gas and oil because Angela Merkel thought that it would be fine to be dependent on Putin's gas and oil. So now the EU is, and they haven't cut off Russia's gas and oil. So the sanctions don't do what they're not going to do. They haven't stopped the invasion and they won't. Now, if they cut off the Russian gas and oil, then yeah. But not even the brave Germans and the brave French are willing to lose their gas and oil for the Ukrainians. So, Russia's lifeline is still intact. And most of the sanctions have been financial, which there's workarounds for. Putin's been laundering money for the past 80 million years. He will find a way. And he has more than he can spend anyway. So it hasn't stopped the invasion, and it won't stop the invasion. The sanctions are overhyped and overstated. The real sanction is Russian gas and oil. That's what they have to do. So Russia's, for example, Germany's doubling its defense budget. And I feel like, hey, they're putting an extra 100 billion. Okay, maybe that 100 billion should be spent on nuclear plants so that you don't have to buy Putin's gas anymore. And then you don't need a defensive army because Russia doesn't have enough money to field a effing army anymore. It's just cut them off. You do both, obviously. But what I mean is, it's very unfortunate that Angela Merkel got the EU hooked on Russian gas and oil. We should have done what Jimmy Carter wanted to do. And what a lot of European politicians wanted to do. And get off of fossil fuels. Just get off of them. We've had the technology for a long time. It's sad. We could have done it back in the 70s. Certainly now we can. So I think that this could be all the people who care about climate change and stuff can ally with the neocon Russian haters as a way of hey, let's get the EU energy independent with renewables to stick it to Russia so that we can actually cripple them. If that happens, then I think that would make Putin wave the white flag, I think. Because there would just be nothing. Russia wouldn't have, he wouldn't be able to pay his soldiers anymore. So yeah, that's what I think the West should do. Rather than, now as far as the immediate situation, well, it's gone to shit. So no matter what the West does at this point, Ukrainians are in the shitter. They're in the shitter. I think that we probably should help Ukraine defend itself. But it would start World War III, and it's not worth it. So I don't think that Ukraine is worth starting World War III over, sadly. Whereas I would think that France is worth starting World War III over, or Germany. And that's a very sad, hard, terrible thing to admit. Is okay, my country and my freedom is worth starting World War III over, but yours isn't. Sorry, Ukrainian. So we aren't going to come fight for you and protect you. Kind of sucks, but it's a little bit how I feel just because Ukraine, is such a fledgling state in a way, and it's just too late. We would have had to start, the process of arming and defending them a long time ago. Just like we have with Poland. They would have to be at Poland's stage of NATO EU development. But because they're not, they're just not enough of an ally to risk World War III over, you know? It's kind of like how World War One was started by Serbia, or yeah, and the Archduke Franz Ferdinand getting killed. It's like Russia decided that Serbia was worth going to World War III over, or going to World War One over, when Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia. But um, um, I don't think that we should make that decision for Ukraine. So basically, they have to defend themselves. But I do think that we should just, at this point, we should just help them with everything. Just give them the best stuff. Not nuclear, of course, but we should just give them Patriot missile defense systems. We should just give them everything. Like Israel, except for nukes. But it's already too late. Like, Russia's already won. The logistical situation is done. Like, there's no way to get that stuff into Ukraine without getting past the Russians, which would start World War III. So, um, it's kind of too late to save Ukraine. It's horrible. But I think that we can't just pretend like financial sanctions are all we have to do and pat ourselves on the back. We have to get off Russian gas and oil. Get off Russian gas and oil. Then we can say we've beaten Putin. It's one of my main things that I never liked Angela Merkel because of that. The ex-chancellor of Germany. She was buddy-buddy with Putin and thought that it was fine because their gas is good. So whatever. A lot of like Trump's mentality of just like, why do we have to be so enemies with them? And it's like, because Putin is diabolical. Putin is man, he's a dictator, So it's just not a good idea to do business dealings with kleptocracies. And Russia is a kleptocracy led by someone who's getting increasingly desperate as he gets closer to death and old age. That's what it seems like to me. But to summarize the video, getting Ukraine to join NATO was ambitious and I would say like borderline belligerent. But at the same time, Russia shouldn't. Why doesn't Russia join NATO, right? It's like, because they just are the enemy. They've decided they are. But what I mean is, it was going to provoke a response, Do you get Ukraine to join NATO knowing that it's going to provoke a response? Well, it's pretty belligerent. So did we kind of screw Ukraine over by going too far with them? I mean, yeah. It seems like that's what kind of happened, is like the West flirted with Ukraine enough to get Putin to do a preemptively force regime change in Ukraine and disarm them, demilitarize them. But then won't fight for the Ukrainians and is kind of just leaving them to get walloped by Putin. And for me, it's like, if you're not going to fight for them, then don't act like you are by getting them into NATO and stuff. Like, we either are willing to fight for them or we aren't. And, man, Putin wants a buffer zone of puppets and satellites at least around Russia's borders, if not farther. So certainly it was quite belligerent By belligerent, I mean that you know going into it that it's going to provoke some kind of response. So you know going into trying to get Ukraine to join NATO that it's going to provoke some kind of response, and yet it seems like we weren't really ready for the response that it got. It's like, wow, we didn't think Putin would go this far, and my question is, well, why not? You know, where did the intelligence fail then? Like, if this surprised the CIA, then that's bad. They should have seen this coming a long time ago. So it was kind of like, my question is, well, what was the plan for Ukraine then? Was the idea that Putin would just kind of let them join NATO? Without knowing what the real plan actually was, or if there was one, it's sort of hard to say. It's sort of hard to identify exactly what the problem was. Um, but going back in time, if I was playing a video game and this was like a simulation, going back in time, I would try to uh, treat Ukraine the same way. Well, I would try to see what happens if Ukraine stays out of NATO and EU membership and all that. And if it's the same outcome either way, then it's kind of like, well, it's hard to know if Putin's going to stop at Ukraine. What I think the United States should do now, and the West should do now, make an effort to get off Russian gas and oil, progressively try to decapitate Putin's economy, and then go and hold him at Ukraine. Hold him at Ukraine. And make it basically just be like, well, because you invaded Ukraine, we're going to make sure it's impossible for you to invade the next country over. Maybe Moldova, okay? But Romania, Poland, Finland, I feel like we might as well almost give them nukes at this point. Like, effectively. Because it's like, okay, well, if you want to draw a line in the sand, then that's the line in the sand. It has to be drawn somewhere. It's not Germany. It's not France. So where is he going to stop? So without knowing exactly where he's going to stop, it's hard to comment on, you don't know the future. But if Putin's going to stop at Ukraine, then it's simply not worth starting World War III over, as horrible as it is. Because you can't start World War III over every little country in the world. I mean, you can, as long as you're okay with World War III, but I'm not. So, it sucks, but you have to keep things in perspective. Of course, we help the Ukrainian refugees, but ideally, you leave them to fight for their country. Because there's nukes pointed at us by their enemy. It's like, I'm sorry, but your enemy has nukes. Like, we can't help directly. So it's a horrible thing, but, people talking about a Russian, like a no-fly zone over Ukraine, you have to ignore all that. You can't engage the Russian military directly, just like how they can't do that to us. Because that would be like World War III territory. I don't even know. It's funny, I say World War III, but I don't know what China would do. They might just sit there. So it would be like Russia versus United States nuclear war. A NATO-Russia nuclear war. But not World War. Because China would be like, wow, well, that was awesome. They would just think, oh, well, now we're in first place. No, not at all. It would be very disruptive. Very, very disruptive. So, yeah, I hope that I don't have a Russian nuke fall on my head someday. Or a North Korean nuke. So, yeah, so what should the US do? Well, besides hurting Putin's economy and getting off of dependence on Russia's economy, um, hold the line at Poland and Romania, not Moldova. Poland and Romania, though. And Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. I don't know if those are worth starting World War III over. I would say that Romania and Poland are pretty much World War III territory, but Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia aren't. And it just comes down to size and power level and relevance. I don't know. It's just a crapshoot, but the United States, agrees. That's pretty much how we operate. So yeah. The worst thing about it is that this really is like a new world order where a country can just take another country. Just like the old, what we call the old days are now the new days, like the modern days. So in modern times, a country can just take another country. It's not like the old days when countries respected each other's borders. That's how we have to talk now. Especially if this keeps happening. But by take, I'm talking about literally absorb into their territory. That's what Putin's threatening Ukraine with, the loss of their statehood. So literally, like, if the US had like taken Iraq and made it a state, and taken Afghanistan and made it a state, and did bad things to the Afghani people, and then took their land and settled there and all that stuff, like old school, old school. But that's new school because Putin gets to decide. He has the power to just decide, okay, well, we're going to do it this way. So yeah, in modern, in 2022, a country was just annexed and taken, like just eaten by another one. Hasn't happened since World War II. Has not happened since World War II in Europe. It's crazy. Anyways, thank you.